This week on 100% Chance of Wine, we visit Long Shadows Winery in Walla Walla, founded by Washington wine pioneer Alan Shoup. Long Shadows is a unique winery dedicated to producing wines that showcase the viticultural excellence of the growing region and honoring the internationally acclaimed winemakers. Come along with us as we explore Long Shadows Winery in Walla Walla. Long Shadows Vintners is a collection of 7 ultra-premium Columbia Valley wines. Founded in 2003 by Washington State wine visionary Alan Shoup, the Long Shadows proposition was as simple as it was complex. Recruit a cadre of the finest winemakers in the world. Give each vintner access to Washington State's best grapes, and outfit a winery to accommodate a diverse group of winemakers exacting cellar specifications. From the beginning, the wines have enjoyed critical acclaim that has continued to grow vintage after vintage. In addition to the wines, Long Shadows collectively has won numerous awards, including recognition as Food and Wine Magazine's Winery of the Year. Well, this afternoon we made our way out to Long Shadows Winery for 100% Chance of Wine, and we're lucky enough to be joined by Alan Shoup. You're the founder, and many like to call the brainchild here at Long Shadows. We'll start off by saying, how did you come up, what's the meaning behind Long Shadows?
The first person who was going to be one of my partners was Bob Mondavi. Bob didn't live long enough to make that happen, but he was excited about it. And I thought of him because he's cast such long shadows over our industry.
What has he really done that has stood out to you?
Bob brought the heart of wine and the reason to enjoy wine into the mix. Before Bob, wine, particularly in America, was mostly sweet. In the 50s, it was half dessert wines. And Bob thought about wine as the first growth wineries, or the classified wineries of Europe, that it's a romantic product, that it's a product that can enhance life, and he taught us that. It's even been said he taught Europe that.
And so he's a name that's well known here and then over in Europe. Let's talk about your background and how you got started in the wine industry. How far does it go back?
It goes back to when I was in my mid-30s and I was working for Ernest and Julio Gallo. And at that time, I think still today probably it's true, they were 50% of the American wine industry, maybe more. And I came out of the cosmetic industry, and that's why they hired me. The cosmetic industry is all about new products. The cosmetic industry is the fountain of youth. And so they hired me for that reason, and I was fortunate that the job I got was one of the top marketing jobs. He ran his company through his marketing managers. And when you get into Gallo, you become on every headhunter's list. And so I was a perfect candidate because I was still single, could move anywhere, and I had a lot of experience. And that's why I was brought to Chateau Saint Michel to run it.
And what did you learn from being there that you brought over here to Long Shadows?
Well, probably everything. It was when I started, there wasn't a Washington wine industry, and I brought the tools that I'd learned at Gallo. I think for sure I was the first person in the industry that had come from marketing background.
So your concept here for Long Shadows is very interesting, and I think a lot of folks would probably steer away from it because it's a really great undertaking. What really drove you to come up with Long Shadows?
Again, Bob Mondavi. I got Piero Latinori to be a partner in Ernie Lucen, and for a while it didn't last after I was gone, but we had one of Australia's most famous winemakers also as a partner. And that, it just works. If you bring them in as a partner, then they're going to really get much more involved because they have an economic stake in the growth of the winery. So decided to do the same thing, find a world-class winemaker who specializes in each one of the grapes or blends that we wanted to make here.
And for folks who don't know anything about Long Shadows, they walk in the door. Describe the concept. You have 7 winemakers that make essentially 7 different wines.
Yes.
Just explain it for everyone.
Well, what they do, of course, the key to the organization, and all these winemakers, when they first said yes, we were all concerned about who would be the head winemaker, who would be the person who would really follow their instructions and make sure that, that the wine was made. They get involved basically in blending the wine, but they can't be here. They're making their own wines. They can't be here at a lot of critical times. And so we discovered Jill Nicole, who was at the time the head winemaker at Woodward Canyon, French taught, and just a wealth of skills, both vineyard skills and winery skills. And it's not an exaggeration to say within a year, all of these winemakers, without exception, said they're not really making the wine, they're collaborating with Jill.
What do you hope to do with Long Shadows? I know your vision, and along with Bob Mondavi, was to get Washington wine and make it worldwide, so everyone knew about it.
Yes, that's my vision for Washington. It has always been my vision for Washington, that we become, first of all, a national brand. Many people, even though the industry only had about 8 to 10 wineries when I started, and now it's got 800 wineries. It had about 4,000 or 5,000 acres of vineyards, and now it's got 60,000 acres of vineyards. Even with all that growth, we're still not known in even most places in the Midwest. We're still not known by a lot of people in New York. We're still not even a national brand, much less an international brand. So we have a long way to go, and it won't be because of Long Shadows that we get there, but we'll play a role in that process.
Do you feel like you've made some kind of impact at least?
Yes, certainly the organizations that I've been able to run have made huge impact. And since I was running them, I get some credit for that. But that credit, the biggest credit for the success of Washington is something that nobody can take credit for. I mean, the biggest reason is something nobody can take credit for, and that is the quality of our grapes. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, I don't think anybody, including myself, knew that we could produce the kinds of wines that we're producing today back in 1980. For the most part, we weren't using the best technologies, and we didn't have enough experience. The vineyards were not planted in the right place oftentimes.
I guess looking ahead for the future of Long Shadows, what do you see?
I see it continuing to grow, mm-hmm. And probably as it grows, we'll also take price increases. We're currently selling out quickly every year. We allocate the wines to our distributors and to our wine club, and then we release it on the internet, and it usually sells out within days. It's got room to grow. I don't want to grow it too well. We make now an average of about 3,000 cases of each wine, mm-hmm. and I don't think we should get more than 5,000 cases, which is about the size of many of the first growths. And then I have 2 sons that are in the business, and what they do, I don't know.
So you're hoping that maybe they would carry this tradition on here at Long Shadows?
They're both working for the company right now, and it would be their option. I mean, it's a difficult industry, and I don't necessarily wish it on them. I mean, I hope, but I don't. More important is that they find their own happiness.
When someone comes in here to Long Shadows and they're sitting down with their glass of wine, what do you hope they take away from your wine?
That's one of the best wines they've ever tasted. I mean, that literally is what I hope. That's what we try to do. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, wine is personal. We're never, even if we made that mythical best wine, there would be a lot of people who didn't like it because, for the same reason that some people like their steak rare and some, neither one's wrong. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with wine. But there is, as you get better and better and better, there becomes more universality in the acceptance of the wine. And so we'd hope to get there. And I think we have gotten to the point where we are universally seen as an excellent wine. Mm-hmm. We've never made a wine that didn't get 90 points or better.
So which one do we have here in front of me?
The wine in front of you is called Saggi, and Saggi means wise men in Italian. Piero Antinori and a few others created, which is a super Tuscan. In Tuscany, they weren't allowed to use only the grapes that had historically been grown in Tuscany. And if you didn't just use those, you couldn't use all their great symbols that you could put on the wine to show how good it was. And so they ignored the symbols and made a wine. They planted Cabernet and Merlot in Tuscany and used those to make their great wines, Ornellaia and Sassicaia and things like that. And that instantly put Tuscany on the map, on the world map of fine wine growing. So we did the same thing here. This is basically Sangiovese and parts of Cabernet Merlot, and then a number of Bordeaux grapes that they would use.
Oh, you want to try this with me?
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers. Coming up, we'll talk with Gilles Nicole, Long Shadow's Director of Winemaking. He describes this as his dream job. We'll find out about Nicole and what makes him uniquely qualified for this position. We've now made our way down to the barrel room at Long Shadow's Winery, and I'm joined by the Director of Winemaking and Viticulture. I'm really going to try hard to say your name, but I'm going to have you say it first because I know I'm not going to get the pronunciation right.
If you want to say the French way, it will be Gilles Nicole.
Gilles Nicole.
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, perfect.
And just describe to me your job on a daily basis, because it's very unique.
Well, it is really unique, and already being a winemaker is really unique. And so it's really important that it goes from the vineyard on to the winery. That's what winemaking is about, is starting with the grapes. But on the day-to-day, then I follow the directions of 6 different winemakers from around the world on following their style and winemaking techniques to make the wine, to have a very distinctive character that reflect what they do in their own country.
And with these 6 different winemakers that you're working with, how often do you meet with them on a yearly basis?
So it depends of the winemaker and depends of the years. Usually 1 to 2 times a year, and even sometimes 3 or more times. So like we have John Duval that does a sequel, is from Australia, and he comes 2 times a year in January and in September during harvest. So it kind of depends. Like Michel Roland from Pedestal, then he's from Bordeaux, but he travels a lot to Napa Valley. So I see him in Napa Valley and sometime in Walla Walla in January, June, and August. That's somewhat is a schedule.
And what are you responsible for? What do they ask you to do when they can't be here with their wines?
So it's definitely a teamwork anyway, and we've been working together since 2003. So we're it's not a recipe, but what is really important is to make a very distinctive wine that's going to reflect of their wine that they've been making for years. Like Michel Roland's been making wines since early 70s in Bordeaux and then all around the world in 20 countries over the years. He still works in 12 different countries. We call him like the flying winemaker because he's been everywhere. And then John Duval has been a winemaker for 44 years in the Barossa Valley. And so for me, getting to work with those incredible winemakers, I follow kind of the style they have developed over the years and trying to make it into the Washington State, into the Columbia Valley grapes.
Have you learned a lot?
Oh, I learned a lot. So I'm from France originally, and so I did a 4 years degree for viticulture and winemaking in Avignon. And so I learned quite a bit at school, but it seems like now that I've been like 13 years with Long Shadows, from the beginning of Long Shadows with those 7 incredible winemakers, it's like even better than going to school. It's good to have both, but it's like I've learned a lot.
What brought you here to Washington State?
Yeah, wine actually. So at the end of my schooling in Avignon in France, I wanted to kind of do a long internship to learn something from something else rather than France, because once you start making wine in France, usually you're stuck over there and you don't really look at the rest of the world, really. We're kind of like that in the French way somehow. But so I got lucky and I got a 1 year internship. I was looking at Australia, Napa, whatnot, and there I agreed to do an internship in Yakima and Washington State. And so that was back in 1994 with 75 wineries in Washington State. And after 1 year, I just loved the Northwest. The Northwest is so incredible. Not only the wine, but the potential is huge here, but all the wildlife and all the mountains and high plateau, and and the ocean is incredible. So I loved, I fell in love with it. So after 23, 24 years or so, I'm still here. And then now there is 900 wineries in Washington State, and so I was not there at the beginning. I'm not a pioneer like Alain, but I was here, towards the beginning of the wave for sure. And since then, it seems like if you count and how many wineries opened up their doors since, it's like almost one every other week. So it's up and coming. Wine industry in Washington State, and now we're really solid for sure. We're like the second producing state after California.
How have you felt to play a part in the growing here of the wines in Washington State?
Well, I usually don't think about it like that, but that's true that, it's a big honor really. It's kind of I don't know how to describe it, but it's be able to be there from the beginning, In France, they've been making wine for hundreds of years, and it's not something you even think. And here for me to think, I'm still a young winemaker, but that I was somewhat at the beginning of something that took off, it's really cool.
Oh, and speaking of awards, Seattle Times, what did they recently name you?
Yeah, the Seattle Magazine, it was a winemaker of the year for Washington State, which, once again, there's a lot of great winemakers and a lot of great wines. And so to be named, the winemaker of the year, means a lot to me, but there's a lot of other winemakers, so it's a big honor for sure.
Has there been any challenges working with the 6 winemakers?
It's always a challenge to make wine anyway, because you go from the grapes into a wine, and each vintage is different, like what to expect like 10 years from now with the wine industry. Each vintage is very different, and so the wine's gonna, it's not a recipe. You're gonna have to react to what Mother Nature gives you as far as grapes, and then make the best you can from that vintage. And that's why at Long Shadows Vintner we do a very strict selection of the grapes. So coming in, we select it, when we go through a lot of sorting table or whatnot for the grapes, and once we're done making the wine in barrel, then we test each barrel and we do a selection, and eventually I sit down with our partner winemakers, and we do a very strict selection at the end until the wine is styled, to our winemaker. Right?
And you make your own wine as well, the one that we have in front of us.
The Chester Kidder, that's right. So when Alain hired me in 2003 to follow the guidance of those different winemakers, which is for me incredible. They have so much experience from around the world, and they all come to Walla Walla to work with me in making their own wine with Long Shadows Vintners. And yet Alain said, we should make a wine together as well. And when I was in France at school, I went to work for Chateau Revlet, and Peter Fischer there was already experimenting with blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah. And so Cabernet Sauvignon brings that backbone in the wine, and Syrah more layers of complexity, darkness somehow. And so I thought, what? Washington State has an amazing Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah, and we should try it. And so we've done it ever since 2003. And what we do differently a little bit to be more distinctive, we keep the wine in French oak for 30 months. So it's like 2.5 years in barrel. And so like our 2014 is not even bottled yet. And so it takes a long time, but then it really refines all those tannins and the mouthfeel to it. Would you like to try it?
Yeah, let's try it.
So it's 58% Cabernet Sauvignon, roughly 30% Syrah, and I always like to put a little bit of Petit Verdot as well.
Okay.
Petit Verdot is a variety that brings a lot of vibrant character to it. So very delicate flavors, refined by the lapse of time in barrel.
Oh, very good.
I also like that brightness of the fruit, yet it has nice complexity of some oak spice to it.
I taste the spice.
Yeah.
Bringing in these 6 different winemakers, it's almost like you're coming here and you're tasting wine pretty much from all over the world.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and for me at the same time I learn the trends and the techniques, winemaking techniques from around the world too. You know, I have a winemaker coming from Italy, from Chile, from Napa, from Germany, Australia, France, and so I get all that trends coming back to Walla Walla, and then they look and they say, oh, they make a wine in Washington State, in Walla Walla, and so it really brings even more awareness to Washington State. I think it really helps.
Well, and the fact that you're using Washington grapes
Yeah.
to make these wines makes it even better.
Yeah, and really, when you look at it, the Columbia Valley is very diverse. You know, we can grow a lot of different type of grapes, and even for a certain variety like Cabernet Sauvignon, there's a lot of different sites where you can make a Cabernet Sauvignon with a little bit riper style, or Cabernet Sauvignon which has still that little bit more dry herb, savory notes to it, and like Randy Dunn loves. The Columbia Valley has been a big asset for Long Shadow's vintners because it's so diverse.
So yeah, what do your friends and family back at home in France think of Walla Walla?
They love it. They've been coming here quite a bit, and at the beginning when they taste the wine, since they're in France, we make wine that's a little bit more about the acidity and a little bit more restrained style of wine. And in USA, New World, usually we use a little bit more new oak, and we push the extraction a little bit more, the maturation. So we make a little bit bigger wine, and so at the beginning they think, oh, what is this? But then they look at the intensity of the fruit and the mouthfeel, and we make incredible wine. So they are different. So at the first time, especially when I take the wine back to France and we test them against French wine, they're like set back a little bit, but then they look and it's like all that intensity, and they love seeing me, you know, being one of the still, you know, winemakers that been around the wine industry for, you know, since 1994, and I love it, you know, I love what I do, and since I love what I do, they're happy for me.
Coming up on 100% Chance of Wine, Long Shadows Winery has some rare and unique glass art made by Seattle artist Dale Chihuly, and we'll see some of the art on display at the winery. And you have some beautiful artwork behind me, behind you, and he's a dear friend of yours too. Explain to me about it.
I met Dale Chihuly when I first moved to take the job here in 1980. He was a close friend of a man who owned a vineyard, and I became close friends of, and he lived in Seattle. Had a dinner party one night, and Dale was there, and we just connected. And then I started inviting him to Saint Michel for lunch, and we had a beautiful executive dining room there and had our own chefs, and so he enjoyed that, and I just loved listening to him. He was the most creative individual I had ever met. You know, you could ask him one question and he'd give you 30 answers of other issues before he got around to finally answering the question. His mind would just shoot off in all directions. He was just very, very creative. And we just stayed friends. And to this day, I frequently meet him for breakfast on Saturdays, and we try to get together as often as we can. He travels more than I do, but
yeah. What's his take on the artwork? What's his inspiration for what he does?
Dale's inspiration was that throughout history, making glass had to do with controlling its dimensions and trying to make it as perfect as possible, through etching, through shaping. And Dale started out with the idea, what would happen if glass became whatever it wanted to be? And he started swinging glass, and in the process making these natural bowls that he calls his machias, and that evolved to his chandeliers, and he's had many different genre of art using art glass, always coming up with new ideas. And of course, the installations that he has put throughout the world are all phenomenal and have all been recorded. And he's in, I think, 300 museum permanent collections. There may be very few artists living, if any, that can say that. Dale made the chandelier with the winery in mind, so it has the tones of grapes and everything. And he selected the macchia pieces that he wanted in here. The installation behind me was also made for the winery. It mimics the grass feuds. You know, it's like a close-up, a microscopic close-up of the grass fields behind us that go all the way to the Blue Mountains. And then we have a poster in the entry, which says 2 long shadows. I don't think he's put a product name maybe on any other poster. So, so we're proud of that.
That's good. The Long Shadows wine is produced in limited quantities and sold primarily through their Key Club and mailing list members. Long Shadows invites you to visit one of their tasting rooms in Walla Walla, Washington and Woodinville, Washington.